Hi guys, welcome back. We are on to our third new book of our book club series, and I'm super excited about this one. It's a lot different from the other ones we've read, and it is called The Lost Bookshop by Evie Woods, and it says on the front, how far will you go to find your story? So this is it, and it is on the bestsellers list. So welcome back, guys. I'm feeling much better, and I don't know how many chapters we're going to be able to read at one time. And it's to all the book lovers. Okay, we're going to start with the prologue. Page 1. The rainy streets of Dublin on a cold winter's day were no place for a young boy to dawdle, unless that very same boy had his nose pressed up against the window of the most fascinating bookshop. Lights twinkled inside, and the colorful covers called to him, promising stories of adventure and escape. The window was packed with novelties and trinkets. Miniature hot air balloons almost reached the ceiling, while music boxes with mechanical birds and carousels twirled and chimed within. The lady inside spotted him and waved him in. He shook his head and blushed slightly. "I'll be late for school," he mouthed through the glass. She nodded and smiled. She seemed friendly enough. "Just for a minute," he said, having fought the urge to go inside for all of 3 seconds. "A minute it is." She was behind the counter, taking more books out of a big cardboard box. She glanced over at his untucked shirt, his mop of hair that had managed to evade a comb for quite some time, and mismatched socks. She smiled to herself. Opaline's Bookshop was a magnet for little boys and girls. "What class are you in?" "Third class in St. Ignatius," he replied, craning his neck to look up at the wooden airplane suspended mid-flight from the vaulted ceiling. "And do you like it?" He scoffed at the thought. She left him leafing through an old book of magic tricks, but it wasn't long until he approached her desk and began looking at the stationery. "You can help if you like. I'm sending out invitations to a book launch." He shrugged and began mimicking the way she folded the letters and stuffed them into envelopes with a little too much enthusiasm. He wrinkled his nose with the effort, changing the constellation of freckles that spread out to his cheeks. "What does opaline mean?" he asked, pronouncing it with far too many syllables. "Opaline is a name." "Is it your name?" "No, I'm Martha." She could tell that he wasn't satisfied with that as an explanation. "I can tell you a story about her if you like." She didn't like school very much either, or rules. "Or doing what she's told?" he suggested. "Oh, she especially didn't like that." Martha smiled conspiratorially. "Here, you finish jamming these letters into the envelopes, and I'll make us some tea. A good story always begins with tea." Chapter 1. Opaline. London, 1921. I let my fingers run along the spine of the book, letting the indentations of the embossed cover guide my skin to something tangible, something that I believed in more than the fiction that was playing out before me. 21 years of age, and my mother had decided that the time had come for me to marry. My brother Lyndon had rather unhelpfully found some dim-witted creature who had just inherited the family business. Something to do with importing something or other from some far-flung place. I was barely listening. "There are only 2 options open to a woman your age," Mother pronounced, putting down her cup and saucer on the table beside her armchair. "One is to marry, and the other to find a post in keeping with her gentility." "Gentility?" I echoed with some incredulity. Looking around the drawing room with its chipped paint and faded curtains, I had to admire her vanity. She had married beneath her station and had always been at pains to remind my father, lest he forget. "Must you do that now?" my brother Lyndon asked as Mrs. Barrett, our housemaid, cleared out the ashes from the grate. "Madame requested a fire," she said in a tone that showed no inflection of respect. She had been with us for as long as I could remember and only took orders from my mother. The rest of us she treated like cheap impostors. "The fact of the matter is that you must marry," Lyndon parroted as he limped across the room, leaning heavily on his walking stick. 20 years my elder, the entire right side of his body had been warped by shrapnel during the war in Flanders, and the brother I once knew stayed buried somewhere in that very field. The horrors he held in his eyes frightened me, and even though I didn't like to admit it, I had grown fearful of him. This is a good match. Father's pension is barely enough for Mother to run the house. It's time you took your head out of your books and faced reality. I clung tighter to my book, a rare first American edition of Wuthering Heights, a gift from my father along with a deep love of reading. Like a talisman, I had carried the cloth-covered book whose spine bore the duplicitous line, "Tooled in gold," by the author of Jane Eyre. We had come across it by complete chance at a flea market in Camden, a secret we could not tell Mother. I would later discover that Emily's English publisher had permitted this misattribution in order to capitalize on Jane Eyre's commercial success. It was not in perfect condition. The cloth boards were worn on the edge, and the back one had a V shape nicked out of it. The pages were coming loose as the threads that sewed them together were fraying with age and use. But to me, all of these features, including the cigar smoke smell of the paper, were like a time machine. Perhaps the seeds were sown then. A book is never what it seems. I think my father had hoped my love of books would instill an interest in my schooling, but if anything, it only fueled my loathing for the classroom. I tended to live in my imagination, and so, every evening, I would race home from school and ask him to read to me. He was a civil servant, an honest man with a passion for learning. He always said that books were more than words on paper. They were portals to other places. I truly believe that. Other lives. I fell in love with books and the vast worlds they held inside, and I owed it all to my father. If you tilt your head, he told me once, you can hear the older books whispering their secrets. I found an antique book on the shelf with a calfskin cover and time-colored pages. I held it up to my ear and closed my eyes tight, imagining that I could hear whatever important secrets the author was trying to tell me. But I couldn't hear it, not the words at least. "What do you hear?" he asked. I waited, let the sound fill my ears. "I hear the sea." It was like having a shell to my ear, with the air swirling through the pages. He smiled and held my cheek in his hand. "Are they breathing, Papa?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "The stories are breathing." When he finally succumbed to the Spanish flu in 1918, I stayed up all night by his side, holding his cold hand, reading his favorite story, The Personal History of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. In some silly way, I thought that the words would bring him back. I refused to marry a man I've never even met purely to aid the family finances. The whole idea is preposterous. Mrs. Barrett dropped the brush as I spoke, and the sound of metal on marble churned my brother's features. He loathed any loud noises. "Get out of here now!" The poor woman had very unreliable knees, and it took 3 failed attempts before she got up and left the room. How she managed to refrain from slamming the door behind her, I will never know. I continued with my defense. "If I am such a burden to you both, I will simply move out. And where on earth do you think you would go? You have no money," my mother pointed out. Now in her 60s, she had always referred to my arrival in the family as their little surprise, which would have sounded quaint had I not been aware of her loathing for surprises. Growing up in a household of an older generation only compounded my urge to break free and experience the modern world. "I have friends," I insisted. "I could get a job." My mother shrieked. "Damn and blast you, ungrateful brat," Lyndon growled, grabbing my wrist as I attempted to get up from my chair. "You're hurting me. I will hurt you far worse than this if you do not obey." I tried to free my arm, but he held fast. I looked to my mother, who was making an intense study of the rug on the floor. "I see," I said, finally understanding that Lyndon was the man of the house now, and he would make the decisions. "Very well." He still held onto my wrist, his sour breath in my face. I said, "Very well." Meeting his eyes, I again tried to pull away. I will meet this suitor. "You will marry him," he assured me, and slowly he released the grasp. I smoothed down my skirts and tucked my book under my arm. "Right, that's settled then," Lyndon said, his cold eyes looking somewhere just beyond me. "I shall invite Austin to supper this evening, and all will be arranged." "Yes, brother," I said before retreating to my bedroom upstairs. I searched the top drawer of the dressing table and found a cigarette that I'd stolen from Mrs. Barrett's stash in the kitchen. I opened the window and lit the tip, taking a long, slow inhale like a femme fatale from the films. I sat at my dressing table and let the cigarette rest on an old oyster shell I had picked up at the beach last summer. A carefree holiday with my best friend Jane before she herself got married. Despite the fact that women now had the vote, a good marriage was still seen as the only option. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I touched the nape of my neck where my hair ended. Mother had almost fainted when she saw what I've done with my long tresses. I'm not a little girl anymore, I had told her, but did I really believe that? I needed to be a modern woman. I needed to take a risk. But without any money, how could I do anything other than obey my elders? That was when my father's words returned to me. Books are like portals. I looked again at my bookshelf and took another long drag of my cigarette. What would Nellie Bly do? I asked myself, as I often did. To me, she was the epitome of fearlessness, a pioneering American journalist who, inspired by Jules Verne's book, traveled around the world in a mere 72 days, 6 hours, and 11 minutes. She always said that energy rightly applied and directed could accomplish anything. If I were a boy, I could announce my intentions to do the great tour of Europe before getting married. I longed to experience different cultures. 21 years old, and I had done nothing, seen nothing. I looked again at my books and made my decision before I finished smoking my cigarette. How much can you give me for them? I watched as Mr. Turton examined my hardbacks of Wuthering Heights and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. He was the proprietor of an airless shop that was, in reality, just a very long corridor without any windows. His pipe smoke gave the air a vicious quality, and my eyes began to water. £2, and that's being generous. Oh, no, I need much more than that. He saw my father's copy of David Copperfield, and before I could stop him, he began to leaf through the pages. I'm not selling that one. It has sentimental value. Ah, now this is interesting. It is known as the reading edition, as Dickens would have read from it as at his public readings. His bulbous nose and tiny eyes gave him the look of a badger or a mole. He sniffed out the valuable book like a truffle. Yes, I am aware, I said, trying to snatch the book back from his greedy paws. He continued with his appraisal as though he were already selling it at auction. Sumptuously bound in full polished red calf, a charming edition, ornate tooling and gilt to the spine, all page edges gilt, original marbled end papers. My father gifted me that book. It is not for sale. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses, sizing me up. Miss Opaline Carlyle. Miss Carlyle, this is one of the best preserved examples of these rare issues I have ever handled. In the illustrations by Helbert K. Brown, you see his pen name Fizz? I added with pride. I could offer you £15. The world fell silent, the way it often does the moment before a life-changing decision. On the path lay freedom along with the unknown. The other was a gilded cage. £20, Mr. Turton, and you have a deal. He narrowed his eyes and his lips betrayed a grudging smile. I knew he would pay, just as surely as I knew that I would devote my life to getting that book back. As his back was turned, I slipped my Wuthering Heights back into my pocket and left. That was how my career as a book dealer began. Chapter 2, Martha, page 11. Dublin, 9 months ago. Hold on, guys. Chapter 2, Martha, Dublin, 9 months ago. When I first arrived at the red brick Georgian house on Ha'penny Lane that cold, dark evening with the rain dripping from my jacket, I hadn't planned on staying. The woman on the phone sounded less than friendly, but I had nowhere else to go and very little money. My journey to Dublin had begun a week previously and from the other side of the country at a lonely bus stop just outside the village. I don't know how long I sat at the bus stop, if it was cold or warm, or if anyone passed me by. All of my senses were dulled by one overwhelming urge to leave. I couldn't see out of my right eye, so I didn't see the bus eventually pulling up. My whole body felt numb, but when I slid off the stone wall, my ribs complained. Still, I wouldn't let my thoughts go back there. Not yet. Even when the driver got down to help me with my suitcase and looked at me as though I had just escaped from a secure facility, I wouldn't let my thoughts go back there. Where to? He asked. Anywhere but here. Dublin, I answered. Dublin might be far enough. I watched the countryside slide past my window. I fucking hated those fields. The small towns with a school, a church, and 12 pubs. The grayness of it pressing in on me. I must have started to doze off because I jumped thinking he was on top of me again. My hands protecting my face. I didn't know what to protect. He was too quick, and when he found the poker, it all fell away from me. Everything. Every hope I had, every naive, stupid hope. I learned something in that moment. You're on your own in this world. No one is coming to save you. People don't suddenly change, say they're sorry, and begin to treat you with respect. They are a jumble of hurt and pain, and they will take it out on whomever they can. I had to save myself. Just a coffee and a toasted cheese sandwich, please, I said to the waiter, picking the cheapest item on the menu. I'd had no luck online, so I grabbed a local newspaper and began searching for jobs. 1 week staying in a hotel, and I was already running out of money. That's when I saw it. Housekeeper, live-in. I dialed the number, and the very next day found myself on the steps of a very grand-looking house, knocking on the glossy black door. Madame Bowden, as I was told to address her, was like no one I had ever met, like a character from some historical TV drama. She wore a feather boa and diamond earrings. Within 5 minutes, she had already regaled me with stories of her days in the Theatre Royal, dancing with the Royalettes, and acting in some old plays I'd never heard of. People called me eccentric, but then I called them boring, so it's all relative. What's your name again? Martha, I repeated for the third time, following her down the stairs to the basement. She had a walking stick, and while she made a big production of it, she seemed agile enough. I guessed that she was probably in her 80s, but she also seemed timeless, an actress who had chosen a character to be frozen in time. Now, the last girl was very happy here, she remarked in a tone that warned me I should feel likewise. It was so dark I couldn't make anything out, save for the half window close to the ceiling, where I could see people's feet walking past at street level. She flicked the switch using her cane, and following a moment's blindness from the large bulb in the pendant lamp, I could see a single bed in the corner with a wardrobe on the opposite wall. Beside the door was a small kitchenette, and just outside a door led to a tiny bathroom with a shower. The lino on the floor was curling at the edges, and the wallpaper similarly obliged, but I immediately felt a sense of safety. It was mine, a space I could call my own. I could close the door and not have to worry about who might beat it down. Well, Madame Bowden asked, arching an eyebrow. It's lovely, I said. Of course it is. What did I tell you? So, do I have the job? She narrowed her gaze, taking in my disheveled appearance. I thank God for what must have been her very poor eyesight, because she didn't seem to notice my battered face, or if she did, it didn't put her off. Oh, I suppose so, she capitulated, whatever it is. But don't get carried away. I'm hiring you purely by default. No one else showed up. Can you believe that? That's the trouble with your generation. Entirely unwilling to do an honest day's work. It's all tickety talk these days, expecting money for nothing. She was still talking as she walked away from me and up the stairs. I carefully sat down on the bed and listened as the springs played like a broken accordion underneath me. Still, it didn't matter. No one would ever find me here. I set the clock for 7 a.m. Apparently, my new employer expected a fine dining experience in the morning, at which point I was to conjure a Michelin star breakfast out of whatever was in the fridge. I would think about that later. I fell into a blessed sleep without even changing my damp clothes or closing the blinds. I sat up the minute I awoke. Why was it so bright? Where was I? And why was my alarm ringing? One by one, my mind slowly answered these questions, and I looked down at my old jeans and baggy jumper. I wasn't sure exactly what the uniform was for being a housekeeper, but it probably wasn't this. I opened my suitcase and pulled out a long gray knitted dress. I could hardly recall throwing it in there, but some part of my brain must have thought to grab things I wouldn't need to iron. I quickly pulled off my jumper and was just unzipping my jeans when I saw the bottom half of two legs walking in front of the basement window at the side of the house. I held my breath until I saw the boots, brown suede with laces. They weren't his boots. I watched, holding my jumper over my bra as they paced up and down and in semicircles. What the hell was he doing? I felt my anger rise. With no small amount of resistance, I managed to push the window open and stick my head out, with my arms resting on the windowsill. Excuse me? No response. I cleared my throat loudly. Still nothing. Can I help you? I highly doubt it. I was surprised to hear an English accent. I had begun to think the feet were not attached to a body at all. I still could not see his face, but already I could read snippets of him. It was something I'd always done, reading people, even though it got me into trouble sometimes. This one seemed distracted, searching, unhappy. "What are you doing here?" I continued my conversation with his shins. "I hardly think it's any of your business. What are you doing here?" "What are you doing here?" "I live here," I said, wishing I'd pulled the blinds in the first place. "So, can you do your peeping Tom act somewhere else?" My voice was shaking a bit. I didn't feel up to having a confrontation with a stranger, but I also wanted my privacy. I could hear his boots scuffing the dirt, and next thing I knew, he was sitting on his haunches, his face looming in front of me. It didn't really match the voice at all, which was all sharp edges that you could cut your finger on. There was a warmth in his brown eyes, or were they green? Hazel, perhaps. His hair kept falling in the way, but his features held the quizzical look of someone who would challenge every word you spoke. "Did you just say peeping Tom?" he asked, clearly amused. "Have you time traveled from the 80s? I wasn't sure which I disliked more, being ignored or mocked. His grin was annoyingly infectious, and it revealed some imperfect teeth, which I read as the result of a short-lived passion for sports. Football, I think. Blocking a penalty kick, he'd been hit in the face. I smiled, then immediately stopped. "Look, if you don't stop stalking me, or whatever it is you're doing, I'm going to phone the police." He raised his hands in surrender. "I'm sorry. Look, my name is Henry," he said, offering me his hand to shake. I stared at it and watched as he sheepishly retracted it. "I wasn't peeping in your window, I promise. I'm looking for something." Likely story, I thought. "What did you lose?" He looked around him at the waste ground between Madame Bowden's house and her next-door neighbor, messing up his already messy hair with his hands. "I didn't lose it exactly." I rolled my eyes. He was a peeping Tom, or whatever. A perv. That was it. I was about to tell him when he blurted out a word I hadn't expected. "Remains. I'm looking for the remains." Oh, Jesus Christ. Did someone die here? I knew it. I knew there was a weird vibe about this place. I got a feeling as soon as I arrived. No, God, no. Not those kinds of remains. He stooped his head low to make eye contact with me again. "Look, I know this looks sketchy, but I promise you it's nothing bad. It's just difficult to explain." For a moment, we said nothing, him crouching by the gable wall, me half hanging out of the window, standing on a kitchen chair. That's when I heard the bell. "What was that?" he asked, trying to peer inside. I looked around and saw a very old-fashioned bell with a wire running away into the ceiling. By the looks of things, I was in my very own real-life version of Downtown Abbey. I turned back to him. "Henry, do me a favor. Whatever you're looking for, go look for it somewhere else," I said, and shut the window firmly in his face. Let's see how many. Chapter 3, Henry. I sat nursing a pint of Guinness in the same pub as the day before and the day before that. I even had my preferred stool at the bar, tucked away in the corner. Tainted Love played in the background, and I topped the beat with the tip of my shoe against the wood of the bar. Sometimes I feel I've got to run away, I've got to tap, tap. I was reading over my notes from the day before. In the course of your life, you'll spend the next 6 months looking for missing objects. An insurance company did a survey once that suggested the average person misplaces up to 9 objects a day, meaning that by the time we turn 60, we'll have lost up to 200,000 things. When it comes to books, how many paperbacks, manuscripts, handwritten drafts have been lost or forgotten throughout history? The number is infinite. How many forgotten libraries remain hidden, like the Duhong Library on the edge of the Gobi Desert, sealed up for 1,000 years and discovered, quite by accident, by a Taoist monk who knocked down a wall whilst leaning against it and smoking his cigarette. Behind it, he found a mountain of ancient documents piled almost 10 feet high, containing scripts with 17 different languages. Who's to say that what treasures are yet to be rediscovered, what lost things are waiting to be brought to light? At least that is what I reminded myself as I spent yet another night in the bed and breakfast I couldn't afford, writing up notes in my journal about the bookshop that didn't exist. Had it ever existed? All I had was a letter from one of the world's most successful rare book collectors to its owner, a Miss Opaline Gray, discussing a lost manuscript. And where had I come across such an unusual piece of correspondence? In the only room in the world where possibility became reality, an auction room. I had spent years looking for the big discovery that would make my name in the world of rare books, and this was the closest I had ever come. I should have been on a flight back to the UK days ago. I took another mouthful of the black stuff, as the locals called it. Motivation comes in all shapes and sizes, and my motivation for staying in Ireland was to avoid looking like a complete failure. That was what everyone expected, including me. If no one takes you seriously, how can you ever hope to do so yourself? I blamed my father and had qualms about it. My very first memory of him was one of betrayal. He told me to stand up and perform with my new toy microphone. It must have been Christmas, and he had some of his mates over. I sang some songs, who knows what, but all I remembered was his laughter, the way it almost resembled a wolf snarling when he was really drunk. The others joined in, and my cheeks burned so much I hardly noticed the hot liquid running down my legs. "He's pissed himself," my father wheezed, falling off the chair with amusement. I can't recall what happened after that. My mother must have come and rescued me, but from that point on, I was always tagged with the reputation of being a crybaby, too sensitive. It didn't help that my sister Lucinda came out of the womb with her fists ready for a fight. He respected her. In fact, we were all slightly intimidated by her, and so my position as the runt of the litter was firmly established. Until I found that Rosenbach letter. Suddenly, I became a man of destiny, as though all of those years missing out on vital stores of vitamin D by ensconcing myself in libraries would finally be vindicated. I ended up spending so much time reading books in the library that everyone thought I worked there, and eventually I thought so too. It reached quite remarkable levels of self-delusion when I began telling the other staff how to perform their duties. When my mother found out, she was furious. "All that money I spent on your fees? You haven't even sat one exam, Henry." Yes, but I had used the money to attend courses at the London Rare Book School, so it wasn't all for nothing. I had a trade even, if no one else saw the extreme love of old books as a trade. Still, I had never actually followed a lead like this. I was hardly Indiana Jones. Lucinda once told me I was about as adventurous as a bucket. Well, who was the bucket now, eh? I laughed, the drink clearly going to my head. I'd spent weeks at Hoppenny Lane looking at any sort of clue, some sign that the bookshop had existed once. A dark shadow like the kind left behind on the carpet when you moved the sofa, but I had come up empty-handed. Until the girl. Where had she come from? She had stared at me with the most piercing blue eyes I'd ever seen. I stared back. She looked angry. No, she looked afraid, I realized. She had the palest skin, but her round cheeks had a pinkish glow. She failed to conceal a nasty-looking black eye under a long bleached fringe. The whole effect was like that of an angel fallen on hard times. I had wanted to keep on talking to her, but what could I say? Have you seen a missing bookshop? Is it possible that your house has consumed it? Are you free for dinner? When she slammed the window and turned away, still clutching her jumper over her chest, I could see a vast tattoo all over her back. Not a design as such, but lines and lines of tiny script, like the Dead Sea Scrolls. We had only spoken for a matter of moments, but I was certain that she was the most intriguing woman I'd ever met. Annoyingly, however, she stayed true to the pattern of most women who met me and took an instant dislike to me. Still, maybe she knew something about the bookshop. So I would have to dig deep and find any modicum of charm to get her on side. 2 hours later, I found myself back at the B&B, standing in a narrow hallway made narrower still by the claustrophobic wallpaper and the framed portraits of at least 5 popes. Orange flowers seemed to leer out at me, and the swirling brown carpet offered no respite. "Are you back for your tea, love?" Nora had the look of Hilda Ogden, but with the thickest Dublin accent I'd ever heard. She was the kind of person who'd seen it all, standing with one arm folded and a cigarette held in a limp hand. She looked as though nothing would surprise her. I envied people like that. If there was a nuclear explosion right now, with bricks and mortar falling around our ears, Nora would probably still be Stillby stood there with her cigarette, rollers in her hair, wondering who'd made that racket, and then getting on with frying some eggs for tea. No thanks, Nora. I ate pie and chips at the pub. I had never met anyone so concerned with my diet, and most of our conversations ended with anxiety over my weight. There generally being not enough of it for her liking. Oh, good. That'll stick to your ribs, she nodded approvingly. And you'll have the full Irish in the morning, she told me in no uncertain terms. I nodded politely and began heading up the stairs to my room, with the frilly curtains and shiny bedspread, but despite the decor, the house had felt immediately like home. Not my home, of course, but the concept of being at home. Perhaps it was Nora's way of making you feel as though she'd known you for years. As though you were part of the family, which, from what I could tell, consisted of 3 Jack Russells and a husband called Barry, who remained safely out of sight. He lives in that shed, she'd said, as he showed me the shared bathroom on my first night, replete with an avocado suite. The sound of a hammer hitting wood had echoed up from the backyard. If I could just get him to sleep out there, she had said with an indulgent sigh. There's a letter for you, by the way, she said now, fishing it out of a pocket in front of her apron. From the council. Looks official. I didn't read it, she added hastily, confirming that she had. Okay, guys, we left off on chapter 4, Opaline, page 23. This is going to be good. This is more of like maybe fantasy, but again, you have the realism and the battered woman and people that are lost, and somehow they're all going to tie in this bookshop. I can't wait. It's going to be really neat, I think. It's something, I've never read a book like this before. But let me read the back of the book real quick. On a quiet street in Dublin, a lost bookshop is waiting to be found. For too long, Opaline, Martha, and Henry have been the side characters in their own lives. But when a vanishing bookshop casts its spell, these 3 unsuspecting strangers will discover that their own stories are every bit as extraordinary as the ones found in the pages of their beloved books. By unlocking the secrets of the shelves, they find themselves transported to a world of wonder, where nothing is as it seems. Yeah, this is very different from anything I've ever read before. I don't usually read things like that, but I thought I would broaden my horizons. I usually read romance and that's it. This is kind of like Harry Potter and romance, maybe, put together. I don't know. But I'm excited about it because it's on the bestsellers list, for one, so obviously it's good. And it called to me when I read the reviews on Amazon. But I will link the book below. And it's harder to find these books in a library because they are bestsellers. They're usually checked out. But, of course, I had to buy this one because we're going to be traveling. I won't have time to turn it back into the library. So, thank you guys for being here. And I'm so excited for this book. So, here we go. All right, guys. See you tomorrow. Bye.